Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I am Chris, here as always with Brendon. How are we doing?
Pretty good. Yeah, that was quite a as we'll talk about very soon, a nice, interesting discussion point. It was always going to be something interesting for us to talk about directly after the game today, and I think that we're in for a doozy. This is episode 206. We are recording a little bit early than the end of the first round because. It is going to cross over a little bit pretty soon.
It's ridiculous, by the way, that the second round starts before the first round finishes.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of happens sometimes when there's a sweep and another series goes to 7. But also it's going to be a busy next few days. So rather than try and squeeze it in sometime, in the next few days and potentially miss out on the start of the second round, it's probably easier, I think, for us to do it today. Look, I think either way. We'll have something good to talk about after the Dallas and Vegas series anyway. But look, I think this is the big one, the end of the Leafs and Bruins series that we want to kind of react to, as freshly as possible. So I think it's going to be a fun one.
Obviously, the most important thing that everyone needs to remember is that after the afterglow of this series ends, the most important thing this week, of course, is that the San Jose Sharks will be shooting their shot for first overall in the NHL draft. And that's the most important thing. There will, by the way, be a live stream of that. Now, before we get into it as well, just to let people know, I've let people know on the Australian Facebook page, but there's been changes to the way Facebook works because, of course, there have been, and they will now not let you directly stream into the group. So all of the streams are going to have to go via YouTube for the time being, YouTube and Twitter, amazingly enough. Who knew that Twitter would work on something that Facebook wouldn't? That's very unusual and not expected. But we are working on different options as well. But the direct streaming, basically, we can direct stream into the group. We used to be able to direct stream into the group. That's not the case anymore. So you'll have to go to YouTube or to Twitter, or obviously just listen to us after the fact as well. But we are episode 206. Now, before we get to the jersey numbers, the trivia is getting harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. I am working on it. But in the meantime, I've got a really just batshit one. There was one player this year who played more than one game in the NHL who was drafted at 206.
Oh, God.
Now, they scored 52 points.
206. Gosh.
Yeah, and they were part of a very large trade within the last 5 seasons.
Okay, so 206, I think off the top of my head, that's something like about the start of the 5th round. Does that sound about right? All right, so that's 52 points, start of the 5th round. Look, it's gonna be someone who maybe isn't a huge star necessarily. It's gonna be someone maybe like a third wheel on a top line or something like that.
Do you want a position?
Yeah, sure.
Defense.
Oh, okay. Well, that's trickier. But 52 points on defense. That's much more impressive.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
And part of a very big trade.
Part of a very big trade. Like recently, part of a very big trade.
Probably one of the biggest what the hell trades we've covered in the last few years.
Oh.
And there's really one that stands out to me as they swapped those 2 players with a couple of other bits.
It's going to kill me when I hear it, but I'm drawing
last
blank.
clue I'm going to give you: the general manager that was around when this trade happened was eliminated from the playoffs today.
Yeah, was this like the was this for the 1-for-1?
Well, it was Florida and the Flames.
Yeah.
Who was the defensive piece that went?
Oh, oh God, what's his name? Uyghur?
Yep, Mackenzie Uyghur.
That's it. Yeah.
Literally the only player drafted at 206 that is still in the league that played more.
That's impressive. I didn't think he did that well this year. I'm actually impressed by that.
I know. I was staggered.
I didn't pay attention to that. That's a big bounce back because he didn't have such an impressive first year after that trade.
Antoine Hudobin played one game this year for the one game. He was drafted 206. Of the rest of them that have been drafted, Ryan Bednard is a player but has not played a game, and Antoine Keller, same thing. The rest of them, no one else has played. So
I mean, it's not too surprising. Like, once you get past the first 3 rounds, there's not a heap of players that have a longevity in the NHL.
No, in 2000, Tim Erickson was drafted at 206.
That was a Leafs pick, wasn't it?
No, Kings
pick. Oh, okay. Maybe he ended up on the I remember him. Maybe I'm missing up with someone else, but
So anyway, so that's the trivia. Jersey numbers again.
I mean, look, I don't know if we count me as getting that one because I did get a bit of help, but
I basically told you it was.
These have been hard.
They are very. Look, I will guarantee you the next one will not be as difficult.
Okay. I need an easy one, Chris, please.
I will give you an easy one for the next one. I promise you. 207. I'll make easy. Interestingly enough, there's some with the number 2 with the number. Obviously we're not doing 206. We're doing the number 6. There's family connections all over the place, actually. So there's lots of them. You've got the Chichrins, who both had that number. There seems to be a number of players. I believe I've been looking into this. Bruce Bell and Brendon Bell, I believe, family. There seems to be a number of these. Obviously, probably the largest one, well, the one still going at the moment is Brock Besser. Of the massive note, but it just seems to be a number that people pass on.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in those defenseman numbers. There's a couple of Toe Blake, Phil Housley kind of Hall of Famers. My personal favorite Stanley Cup champion, Daly. But
I'm checking to see if Ben Gleason is any relation to Tim. Because again, that seems to be another one which might be a link. But there's
a lot of names like that in the NHL where you look at it and kind of go, surely these people are related. Like, how many could there possibly be?
Yeah, exactly. There can't be that many of them. It turns out in a lot of cases there really are. So let's get into it because everyone's here for the big news, the really big news, and we are here for the really big news. But before we get to the really, really big news, we do need to talk about the fact that Bob Cole passed away at the age of 90. Bob Cole, if you've heard basically any old big hockey coverage, basically you've heard Bob Cole.
Yeah, I mean, look, a very long career, 50 years in broadcasting. Retired in the last few years. Famous for some very big. If you see any kind of highlight reel, NHL kind of plays. Oh baby, everything is happening. All these kind of big kind of Hall of Fame calls in NHL history. So disappointing to see, but it's nice that he got to kind of go out in 2019 and be celebrated, and the end of his career and all that kind of stuff.
And they made a massive deal about Bob Cole's last game was a massive event. So
very few, I think, broadcasters and commentators and stuff that have quite as much of a universal kind of following and support and
we've seen a little bit of it from Boston people with Jack Edwards. When we get to the point where Ron McLean eventually does decide to retire, you're going to see that with Ron McLean. I know he technically retired previously, but the next one will be the actual retirement for Ron McLean. But Bob Cole, absolute icon of commentators, and again, any classic calls that you hear sort of in that, and again, especially through things like that Gretzky era, that Gretzky Lemieux era, there's a lot of Bob Cole on those calls. A lot of Bob Cole. Right, we know why you're here. We know why you're watching, so let's get into it. Dave Haxtell's been fired as the coach. This one was really interesting because Kevin Weeks started immediately stirring up the idea that Rod Brind'Amour was the guy they were going to bring in, to which everybody was like, he's not leaving Carolina for the Kraken. There's no way. And Brind'Amour came out and went, it's flattering, but I think everyone knows that I'm quite content where I am.
Quite happy where I am. Yeah.
Look, I think it's going to be interesting because I think what this does is adds a bunch of zeros to the next check for Rod Brindamore from an ownership, by the way, that is notoriously frugal and doesn't like paying. And that's sort of been the really interesting thing, is that I think the ownership in Carolina doesn't usually like paying a lot of money to, especially to people at the top end. And I think they're going to have to pay Rod Brindamore some big bucks to stay. It could be really interesting depending on what happens in their series against the Rangers, because if they go out to the Rangers and don't make it to the conference final, that could also be intriguing. And then he might become an option for Seattle. But I'm not surprised that Dave Haxtell was fired, but I also think that he's a victim of unexpected success. Because they should probably not have been as good as they were last year. And this year they regressed.
Yeah, I mean, look, probably the success that they had, I wouldn't say necessarily came out of nowhere. Like, Seattle have always been a decent team from the point when they started in the league, but that's kind of been it. Like, they haven't ever been like a particularly impressive team, and that's kind of part of the reality of the way that they, went into the expansion draft. They, they had this kind of, depth approach where they weren't going to, shoot for these big stars and stuff. They notably left, a handful of, more marquee names, out of their draft and everything. I don't really know what their expectations are of what this team is supposed to achieve realistically, considering, what they've been set up to do. Like, are they supposed to be competing for a playoff spot, or are they kind of still building? I really don't understand what this kind of murky middle that Seattle have thrown themselves into is supposed to necessarily culminate in.
They've put themselves in a middle ground. Like, what they've done, they've put themselves in a middle ground. And I don't understand. I mean, most teams that find themselves in a middle ground, that's an overtime process. Seattle sort of lobbed themselves in there. Now, I think the interesting thing you're going to see, and we'll talk about it a lot more in a minute as well, at the end of before we get to the wrap-ups, is I think there are going to be a couple of teams with very big checkbooks that are going to be throwing money at people. And I think Seattle are going to be in that bracket in this offseason. I think Seattle, first of all, I do think they're going to make an approach towards Brindamore. If the Hurricanes don't beat the Rangers, I think that becomes a big story. But I just feel like, Seattle's in this really weird mid spot, which you knew if you look at the roster they picked up a lot of solid guys that had been around, but also some solid guys that have been around that you're going to need to replace within 2 to 3 years. And when
I kind of thought when they started to build that the idea was like they were going to flip some of these assets and they were going to try and kind of, not necessarily compete right away, but be respectable, try and build a fan base, and then just flip a lot of these pieces and kind of rebuild on the fly. And I don't know if we've necessarily seen them, they've added a couple of guys over time, and there's a handful of like quality guys there, but it's a real like top to bottom, just roll your lines, we're all decent kind of lineup, which is not really doing much for them. I feel like either way, one way, they don't have a heap of cap space going into this off season where they can add like some big star. Like maybe that will make a splash if they can. But
the other big thing for me though with Seattle is that I think a lot of people, and this is where I talk a lot about people, especially in the Canadian media, don't pay any attention to what's happening in the Pacific. They don't know. They know Edmonton's over there and Vegas are over there and they're good, and that Calgary exists in that bubble. But they don't actually pay any attention to the Pacific. And anybody who watches the Pacific closely will tell you Seattle benefited last year from a Pacific that sucked. Absolutely sucked. And the reason why they struggled more this year was the Canucks got good. That's it. That's the difference. The difference between last year and this year in the Pacific is the Canucks got good.
Yeah.
That's the change.
The
Flames, still not great. The Ducks, horrible. The Sharks, we'll get to us in a minute. Right? Absolutely terrible. The Kings and the Canucks were decent. The Canucks in the first half especially were amazing. Then regressed a little bit. But Seattle benefited last year because there were literally only a couple of good teams and somebody needed to get the last place.
Yeah.
And that's what happened with Seattle. This year, Canucks took another step forward, and that meant there was no room for Seattle.
I feel like Seattle's kind of at a point where like they're kind of like a B grade Carolina in terms of like they probably need a few more difference makers for them to get over.
Carolina without an Aho.
Yeah. They don't have an Aho. They don't have, like Gensel currently, like that, but that's obviously a recent addition for them or anything. They need a couple of stars to come in and fuse that lineup. It probably doesn't help them that Shane Wright hasn't really, hit necessarily yet. Hopefully, he still will. But if they can add like a couple of difference makers, this could easily be a team that can actually go somewhere, but they just don't really have those guys at the moment.
It's just it's a roster where there's one player signed for over 6 million. One player over 6 million. Everyone's on 5.5. Everyone's on 5.5.
Yeah, and there's just a bunch of average dudes, like a bunch of good but not great second liners, basically.
Yeah, it's a very
So I don't know what they expect from whoever they add as a coach. Like maybe they're gonna try and grind this out in a kind of Islanders Columbus kind of way and add someone who's gonna play one of those kind of systems and stuff. But it doesn't excite me.
I think there's an obvious candidate for Seattle, but I think that candidate might be waiting out because I think that candidate might feel like they're in with a chance at another job that may open up. I think that, well, let's face it, how many people do you know who have winning records, have made big strides, and are sitting out available as a head coach waiting, known for grit and development? It's Gerard Gallant the whole way.
Yeah, it feels like a very Gallant
I think that Gallant, except for the fact that I think Gallant might have a bit of a sit and a bit of a wait and see what happens to Sheldon Keefe. And we will talk about that one in a minute. That feels like a likely destination. Who knows? They might just swap coaches.
Well,
Buffalo Sabres.
Actually, there was a comment recently about, but before we jump to it, with the Pittsburgh Penguins, like with the announcement that Todd Reardon wasn't going to be returning as assistant coach, there was kind of a vague mention from Kevin Weeks about, Mike Sullivan, who still has a contract with the Penguins as the head coach, about like, there's seems to be unlikely that they're going to cut ties with him in terms of firing him, but there's a possibility that maybe it might be a coach trade, which was a real interesting kind of thing to me. It was like, okay, I don't know if this is necessarily just speculation, but that could be an interesting thing to think about. It's a very rare thing that happens in the NHL, but I do wonder, if there's some coaches that just kind of feel like they need there's potentially needs a change of pace, needs a different voice kind of thing, and I feel like that's kind of a bit of Mike Sullivan with the Penguins and stuff. I wonder if there's one of those kind of fits where we were talking about, like, two coaches that are not necessarily bad, but maybe not the right voice in that room anymore, that do end up with a switch this offseason.
Yeah, I think that there's. Yeah, I think we've got a few interesting moves coming up, and we'll talk about another one that's not on our list, but I think you'll know which one's not on our list of things that I'm going to talk about because it happened in the meantime. So the Buffalo Sabres, however, have found a new head coach, and they searched long and they searched hard and they had a really long think about it and went, oh, that's right, Lindy Ruff still got the password to the facility. So his
parking spot's still out.
Yeah, look, Lindy's got some gear at home, so like he can even cut hat. That the logo hasn't changed that much. Lindy Ruff is once again the head coach of the Buffalo Sabres in a move that just feels so boring and so Pagulas. I don't understand this one. You've got a roster that could be so much, and you do that.
Not exciting, is it?
I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
I mean, to be honest, rarely is a coaching change necessarily that exciting, but at the same time, there are so many the various degrees of like, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think that one's. That one feels almost like Buffalo decided they couldn't get anyone else.
Yeah, they're like, whatever, that'll do.
No one was answering the phone. As you mentioned, Todd Reardon's not returning as an assistant to the Penguins.
Which I'm look, to be honest, I'm glad for, because the special teams that he's been responsible for some time have been just god awful. You mentioned the other day about, like, rarely have you seen a power play as bad as the Leafs power play. And I would absolutely put the Pittsburgh Penguins over the last few years. Basically, the entire time since Phil Kessel has been on the Penguins, their power play has sucked. Like, he was pretty much like the straw that stirred the drink for the Penguins power play during his time there. And since then, it's like they all just kind of went like, oh, one of the other guys will do it. Crosby will do it. Malcolm will do it. You know, and they all just fucking suck for years. And I think a big part of that, you know, they probably really need someone to come in there and really mix things up. And it will be nice if they manage to find an assistant coach that will do that.
Yeah. We'll talk. I'll go through the last bit of news before I get into the other coaching change that I want to talk about, simply because it's fast, but also it's funny to me. The Chicago Wolves, who have been part of the never-ending carousel of who do we want to be affiliates for, have settled on the other team that's part of this carousel about who do we want to have as an affiliate of the Carolina Hurricanes. So,
yeah, we talked about last week, you know, the Hurricanes being one of those teams that didn't have an AHL affiliate, and then just like a couple of weeks later, like, oh, actually, we'll have the Wolves back.
The independent Wolves come back and go, actually, yeah, why not? So the other coaching vacancy that I need to talk about, of course, is the San Jose Sharks.
Yes.
Mike Greer did the thing. Mike Greer did the thing, and he sacked David Quinn. Interestingly enough, he did not sack any of the coaching staff down at the Barracuda, which is crazy. If you listen to the conversation that I had the other day with the guys from Tealtown, we were very much talking about the fact that they needed to basically change everybody inside the Barracuda. Instead, they've kept everybody, including Joe Will, as GM down there. There's talk they're going to bring in some experienced help to help them out behind the bench. I have no problem, obviously, with the Quinn firing, although I understood the idea of keeping him for another year if the Sharks were going to suck for another 12 months, which they will. But my problem is that if you're going to make that change, you've got to change up the Barracuda, because the development system needs to be better. The Barracuda were terrible. They've got really good young players on that team, and the Barracuda were horrible. And development pipeline is what the Sharks are now trying to make flow. And they've built up the prospects. They're doing a very good job of building prospects. But if the developmental still sucks, you've got a problem on your hands when you're trying to get them into that top lineup. So I really wanted to see more change at the Barracuda level, which didn't happen. In terms of the new coach, there's been a bunch of suggestions coming out. I have said since day one, I felt like the Sharks hired the next coach, Ryan Wasowski. I was sure that's him. There's some conversations around that, but there also seems to be a bunch of other names coming to the fore as to who could end up as the San Jose Sharks coach. The really intriguing one is bringing Marco Sturm back to San Jose as head coach.
Okay.
Currently coaching the Ontario Reign. He played with Mike Greer. He gets on really well with Mike Greer. There's a couple of other suggestions. Brian Wiseman, who's one of the other assistants, has apparently been suggested. There's also been some left field ones. Joel Ward's name's come up as maybe he comes back to San Jose as a first-time head coach.
I think the question for me is, like, is the task still to babysit a rebuilding team for a couple of years? Like, is that still the, just try to make it not depressing for us while we lose, or what's the plan going forward?
This is the question for me: is if that's the plan, keep Quinn for 12 more months.
Yeah, that's.
Everyone knows I have been on team fire David Quinn for as long as anybody has.
Yeah,
but if you are going to be babysitting, if you're not going to be much better,
yeah, what's the point? Like, what's the difference?
Why are we going to bring in a Sturm, or why are we going to do that to somebody else? only in a couple years' time to hire another head coach again.
Yeah.
Which we're starting to now get a reputation, having been fairly stable. We're now starting to get a reputation of a team that fires coaches every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And you can't be that team. Whoever is hired by Mike Greer needs to stick. And I think will stick regardless of what the results look like. So do you get someone with a bit more experience to sort of settle them down? I mean, look, one of my big concerns about Quinn the whole way along has been that David Quinn is a head coach who was regarded as a great college coach who's got a really bad reputation for working with young players. Absolutely horrible reputation for working with young players. I like Wasowski because, again, his work in the AHL with Chicago in particular has been outstanding. And he turned them into an absolute powerhouse. I don't know. I kind of feel a bit concerned by what the direction is. And that, again, is before we get to this week, which is such a big week for San Jose. It's such a massive week for the Sharks. And, you know, I'm concerned. I'm wondering if the coaching decision hedges on if it's Celebrini or not. Part of me is wondering if it's Macklin Celebrini, do they suddenly go for someone with a bit more experience?
That is probably a big question, really.
Yeah.
Like, because if they end up with a pick that like we saw with the Blackhawks, that kind of escalates their, really jumpstarts their rebuild in a very significant way of suddenly, like, rather than it being like, oh, we're going to slowly build over the next few years, it's like, okay, well, maybe we've shaved a year or two off this rebuild or whatever, and we can start to surround this core piece with some quality now and probably compete a year or two earlier. Then that probably changes the arithmetic a little bit on the coach.
Before we go into the playoffs, my last question to you on coaching front is, are you ready for Pittsburgh Penguins head coach Sheldon Keefe?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked.
Look, it could very well happen.
I have really mixed feelings on Mike Sullivan, to be honest. I think for about 2 years now, I've been kind of out on him, and not necessarily anything to do with his coaching. I think that he's an incredible coach and would be good on any competitive team, but I think also that he has maybe run his course in Pittsburgh, and to some degree, like, I feel like if you could just get another decent coach and just switch them around or whatever, I wouldn't be necessarily against that at this point of the Penguins kind of arc of I just kind of feel like we've seen the end of Sullivan's kind of reign in Pittsburgh, and as much as they probably won't just fire him because there isn't a better option out there, I don't know. I wouldn't be super upset if they made that swap, like if that actually happened, just because I feel like they kind of just need a different voice. They kind of just need some kind of spark at this point.
I also think that Keefe will be so much better in his second job, and I think as well, if you hire Keefe, you hire some very good experience with him, and you basically, and I think that. I think that Dubas knows him well enough, obviously, that he knows where the weaknesses are. And I think that FSG will open the checkbook for it. And if he goes, I need someone to do this, 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 and this to make Sheldon better, and I want to bring Keefe in because look at what he's done with this and this and this, I think it works.
I think it could honestly be a good swap for both teams in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think someone like, look, I wouldn't be against someone like a Sullivan at Toronto. I think that's not a bad move. I think they're more likely to go Gerard Gallant, and I think that's going to have their own problems because I don't know how Gerard Gallant copes with having skill players on the ice. But that's a whole other conversation, and I can already hear people going, "Stop bagging out Gerard Gallant." No, make me. Anyway, let's move on to the playoffs, and let's start. Yes. No, I'm not going to rob you all of this. We are going to start with Toronto versus Boston.
We have to.
Obviously, the Bruins take this 4-3 after winning in overtime of Game 7 2-1. in a series which was over after game 4 and then suddenly wasn't over. Look, this is a weird one. Toronto played this series at no point at full strength. At no point.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, I don't want to make excuses for them, but like coming into this series, obviously they had Nylander, I think, missed the first 2 or 3 games.
And he's confirmed. I've got quotes up while we're going, and Myrtle tweeted out that Nylander said that he had a condition which made it very difficult to see.
Oh,
so the migraines that he was having, which, although it's not migraines, no, it was migraines that basically made his vision go.
Oh, yeah.
So he's like, you can't play when you can't see.
No, that's tough. And then, you know, directly after that, after getting him back, Matthews is out for, for those last couple of games, really, for 5 and 6, where they managed to, squeak out a couple of 2-1 wins and force it to game 7. And then all that time, basically, running 3 different goalies through the course of the series. Obviously, to win in the playoffs, you need a lot of luck, and a lot of that luck is injury luck. And I think that they definitely didn't have that. I don't know necessarily whether this would have ended in a different result. Like, I picked basically exactly this outcome without knowing that any of those injury kind of things, would happen. But I also honestly expected David Pastrnak to have a bigger impact in this series, and he really kind of didn't until that kind of game 7 overtime winner. As beautiful as a play as that was, Lindholm banking the puck off the boards, as much as people want to look at that and say that's a fluky play or a lucky bounce or whatever, like that was an intentional bounce.
No, he meant that, and they'd done that a few times where they'd played off the end boards.
Yeah,
and I think the large reason behind
that's a set play. Yeah,
look, the reason why I think Boston did this is because the Toronto defense is not mobile. It's not a mobile defense. They can't turn fast, and as we saw with the play for the series winner, Morgan Riley looks like he's skating on sand. Like, puck goes over. He said, yes, it takes a bounce off the boards and comes back. But Samsonov has probably been told to not move out of his net, because in the first part of this series, he was all over the place out of net, and as a result, left gaping holes. So Samsonov has probably got in his mind, don't go out and give them space. So Samsonov doesn't come forward to try to play the puck. At the same time, Morgan Riley turns with all the turning circle of the QE2 and starts very, very slowly. Like, he doesn't even, at no point does Riley seem to vaguely think that David Pastrnak is there. Like,
I think there's a lot that Samsonov can do in that goal realistically. By the time he could have played that puck, it's directly in front of him on Pastrnak's stick.
Yeah, and Riley turns, and like, there's no push off. What I noticed with it, it's not like, oh, well, what was Riley supposed to do? He doesn't vaguely skate towards the puck with any sense of urgency. He turns and glides a little bit. And then you see him suddenly realize, as the stick comes into shot, you see Riley suddenly go, oh, by that point, Pasternak's passed. It's over.
It's gone. Yeah, he's out of there. He's
I think this wasn't an accident, right? The Boston Bruins had been playing pucks in behind. And they talked about it. At the end of the first intermission, they talked to, I can't remember who it was from the Bruins, and his comment was, we're pushing the puck in behind them and making them turn around a lot, and we're getting into that corner. He said it openly. We're pushing in behind them and making them turn. And I think that McCabe was probably the best defenseman for the Leafs across the series. But outside of that, I thought like Lyubushkin was fine. Morgan Riley wasn't great again. I think you've got some big problems on that blue line. And if you've got, look, I like Morgan Riley. Morgan Riley is your first defenseman is probably a problem. He doesn't have a great turning circle. He's not fast on that turn. His awareness just seemed off. It was really interesting. The Leafs played well in game 6. Riley had a shocker in game 6. Really wasn't good. Marner, there's going to be a whole conversation around Mitch Marner. We'll get to that in a minute.
I saw people pointing out that Pastrnak slips behind Marner on that last play. I don't know what Marner realistically was supposed to do. He can't legally tie Pastrnak up on that play.
Can't tie him, but he should probably at least follow him.
But he probably should. He probably should have been back checking on that. Yes, absolutely. But yeah, look, I think obviously not a super impressive series for Marner. It doesn't help, that coming into this offseason, where he was probably already the most obvious trade ship. Look, I think that it's difficult.
So Sarah Sevian, by the way, just quickly, because I want to give you this quote. Sarah Sevian just tweeted out that Sheldon Keefe said at the press conference, and I'm quoting him directly here, "When teams play the Leafs, they set up the game for the Leafs to beat themselves."
Yeah.
That's a quote from your head coach.
Yeah.
He's gone. He is gone.
Oh, I think he knows. I think he knows.
There's no way that man keeps his job.
Yeah, you don't say that. You don't see that and be coming back. Absolutely. Like, I mean, look, I don't think any of that is a shock. I think we all knew that this was a do or die series for the Leafs, as it has been really for the last few years. The last one essentially effectively ended up resulting in Dubas, being fired, and this one will probably end up in Keefe being fired, and we'll probably end up with more changes because they already made a handful of changes. Not that any of them helped them in any way this year to win a series or to change their luck in any way.
So what I thought was a really interesting concept was, because the other suggestion is that this is also probably the end of Brendan Shanahan. Shanahan, his bullet was Dubas. His bullet was Kyle Dubas.
Yeah.
And when he fired, and again, they agreed to part ways, he fired Kyle Dubas.
Yeah.
When he fired Kyle Dubas, that was his bullet. And that was a tacit agreement that they are not changing the core four and they are not moving away from what they've done. And they were going to do exactly the same thing, but just add players around it. The suggestion, SDPN put out the suggestion the other day, which I'm kind of here for a little bit with the idea, is you move Brad Treliving up to the president of hockey ops instead and bring in a new general manager coach duo. And I mean, look, from a starting point, if I'm a Leafs fan, I'm probably a bit more comfortable than letting Treliving do the rebuild. But I think that would probably be an idea, because I don't think there's any way that Shanahan survives this. I don't think Sheldon Keefe survives this. I think everyone agrees that Sheldon Keefe's gone. I also think this is not because this, and a lot of people, they failed, they suck, they're not a terrible team.
No.
The reason the changes are about to happen is not because they're terrible. The reason the changes are about to happen is you can't do the same thing this many times and get the same result and not make a change.
It's basically been this situation for the last 3 years, and it's kind of every year. It's like, is this the year the core's going to get broken up? Is this the year that they're going to trade X and Y?
This is the one, and I think everybody. The interesting part is there's been some conversations coming out of Toronto that are suggesting that Marner would waive. Normally, you get not going anywhere, not going. None of these players are waiving. No one's going anywhere. You're starting to get the feeling that Mitch Marner will waive if he gets an offer that he likes somewhere else.
Yeah,
and that could be really interesting.
Yeah, I think as much as we look at these no trade clauses and go, there's no way anything could go anywhere. Like, it really depends on the team. Yeah, look, everyone's got a team that they would go to
be that person. And we talked about this when we reviewed the documentary. To be that person, if Wayne Gretzky can be traded from the Oilers, anyone can move. There is nobody in the league that is untradeable.
Yeah, I mean, this is not to say that this will necessarily make the Toronto Maple Leafs a better team on ice.
No, they will probably actually take a step backwards.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that like this, especially this Toronto-Boston thing, this really reminds me of like Washington-Pittsburgh in a lot of ways, where Washington a lot of the time were like the better team. They finished higher in the standings. They were the stronger team by and large. A lot of the times they outplayed the Penguins in the series, and for the most part, for like 5 years, they just got like they just lost the series over and over again until finally the 1 year that they won the cup. But like it took them like 5 or 6 attempts to do it. And look, that might be the reality for Toronto, but you don't always kind of get that chance. And the narrative around Alex Ovechkin up until that point was like, this guy hasn't got what it takes. He's he can't win the big games. He's not a leader. He's not, there was real kind of question marks around his legacy as like because he didn't have this like team award of getting past the these stumbling blocks in the second round of the playoffs and getting into the final and winning it all. And all of a sudden, it all just went away when they won this one time. And I feel like that there's a chance that could have happened for Toronto and for everything if they if they got through, or they made a big run, they got to the cup final or something like that. Like all of a sudden, all of that goes away. But until it happens, you're kind of jailed by it. You kind of handcuffed by this.
The series was determined for me. The series was determined by a couple of things. First of all, that Leafs power play is atrocious, absolutely horrific. Like again, you talked about you put the Penguins up against but with this offensive.
I think they've got similar problems. They've got too many cooks, and
they also spend all of their time. They come in, they overpass. They want a perfect shot, not a shot. Like, what did the Bruins do to win the game? They put the puck into an area where you could just have the puck loose and hit it. That's what they did.
That passing play works for some teams. Like, at the height of like the Tampa power play, that's really what it was. In the years when they were winning, that it was an incredibly deadly power play because they found a way to get it into certain space. They found a way, somehow it got to point, somehow it got to Kucherov, and it was incredibly effective. But sometimes it just doesn't work, and you got to change it up.
And if you see it coming, and if every team sees it coming from a mile away, like I can tell you how the Leafs are going to enter the zone. The big difference that I saw in this series was Boston enters the zone at speed with numbers. Mm-hmm. And the Leafs skate towards the line, lay it back. Next player skates towards the line, lays it back.
That is exactly the Penguins, drop pass.
And that's the issue. They come in, drop pass, come in, drop pass, come in, drop pass. Then one player enters the zone. Then
everyone else enters flat-footed behind them.
Then a drop pass inside the zone. And then they get the puck out to the left or the right, whichever side it's coming from. They play it across to the middle. That player gets the puck, shapes out to go one way, lays it out the other. That player lays it all the way back across the ice again, and they try to – and the other team just goes, no, you're not shooting. That's fine. We'll just stand here. So that power play –
it's exactly the same fucking power play, yeah.
The thing is, I think there were a lot of people across this – whenever people talk about the Leafs and their cap situation, they go, oh, Tavares, man, Tavares. John Tavares was the hardest working. I mean, William Nylander got the points, and Nylander played brilliantly when he was available. John Tavares did all of the dirty work for the Leafs this series, all of it. I think Tavares was amazingly good across this playoff series, but he does the stuff that's not flashy, and as a result, nobody pays attention to him. Like, think about the goal that kept them in it, the nice goal that kept them in it. Why did the goal take place? Because John Tavares had the puck on his stick, took on a bunch of Boston defenders, and just went, "You're not getting it. This is mine." Pushed his way into the zone, pushed his way to the front of the net, made sure that he got the space, and then put the shot on so the deflection would go to Nice for a simple tap in, which is what he got. Right? Tavares made things happen in a way that some of the others didn't. Whereas Mitch Marner, for example, who was actually decent defensively in this series, but offensively was an absolute nightmare. Because Marner, there were a couple of times where he'd get the puck on his stick, he comes in, he goes, I'm going to shoot. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, no, I'm not. Oh, no, I'm not. There was that one in game 3, I think it was, where he literally skates from the left-hand side of the ice to the right-hand side of the ice, fakes 4 times and loses the puck.
Yeah.
Shoot. Have a shot.
I think rarely with any team can you point to like one player and kind of go, oh, everything would be great if we traded this one player for one. Like as much as fans want to make it that simple, that's not usually the case.
I think the Marner trade for me coming up, which I think will happen, is not about Mitch Marner is the reason this team loses.
No.
I think what needs to happen is the Marner trade frees up the space to allow you to get a goaltender, which you need desperately. And because Joseph Woll's fine, but he's not the second coming. And Samsonov's done. And you need a defenseman, a good one, not a grizzled veteran who's on the end of a deal and coming to the end of his career and he's going to bow out in a couple of years, but he'll give it one last push you need a good one. And that's going to cost you some cap space. So you need the Mitch Marner cap space, not to replace him with another forward, which some people will call for. You need a defenseman and you need a goalie. And you use the Marner cap space for a goalie and a defenseman. You need to do that. And that's the challenge, is everybody knows what Toronto needs too. That's the other part of this, is that all of the other general managers know. everyone knows, and everyone knows who's on the chopping block. So everyone knows that Toronto is going to be moving Mitch Marner.
Yeah.
So everybody knows.
I mean, it's a hard deal to get value for in the first place, just because of the cap hit, not necessarily because of the quality of the player. I mean, look, I think that there's probably a fit that could be found, somewhere. But I wonder if they end up taking back something, that is suboptimal because
I think everyone needs to get over the idea about winning or losing a trade for the Marner trade, and I think the more important point is, do they free up the cap they need to get things elsewhere? I think that's the more important point. It's not going to be, well, look at the lack of assets they got back. Wow, they really shut the bed on that one. I think the thing you're going to need to look at more with that trade when it does happen, and I think that will be the move. I think what you need to look at with that trade is, do they clear enough space and give themselves the space to put the assets in play? If they make the Marner trade, don't bring in a goalie and don't bring in a defenseman, they lose. That's the loss of the trade. But if they make the Marner move and then fill the rest of those spaces up with what they need, then you can look at it and go, okay, that's what they needed to do. But I think, and I think what will happen is, I think if Marner goes, I think that also means that Tavares will re-sign on a significantly reduced next contract to see out his career in Toronto, which I think that makes sense. Logic, All right, let's move on. So the Boston Bruins reward for this series, and by the way, we didn't really talk about Boston, and the main reason for that is I don't think this Boston team's particularly good.
No, I think they were fine. Like, to be honest, I think we saw more from like Marchand and some of those kind of depth, players than I was necessarily expecting.
Boston's strength at the start of the series was they just did the basics well.
I think that's kind of Boston, really, especially at this point in their kind of cycle, is really just kind of...
They didn't hit, they weren't dirty, they weren't nasty, they weren't cheating.
They just do what they need to do. I think
they stood in the right spot.
Just putting themselves in a position to let the Leafs beat themselves.
The series for me, if you want to know the difference in the series, it's that game 1 5-1 blowout, and it's the Ryan Reeves racing out of the line to put a pointless hit on because he wants to be tough for the playoffs. And Boston just passing the puck around him, calmly moving up the ice and slotting it in. That's the difference. The Leafs went out there at the start of the series to hit and be tough and rah, and Boston just went, we're just going to play hockey. And we'll check hard and we'll hit you hard, but we'll hit you hard in a way that's in line with the game plan, not let's charge. And that's the difference. So Boston's reward is the Panthers. And I don't see that as a reward. I think the Florida Panthers.
I mean, look, that was kind of always going to be that's the reality of this playoff format. A lot of the time, you end up with the top two teams in the division playing each other in the second round.
I think the Florida Panthers are going to stomp the Boston Bruins into the ground. They were imperious against Tampa. They were so good.
Yeah, I don't like Boston's chances in this series, and
I wouldn't have liked Toronto's chances either. I think whoever won this series is getting stomped by Florida.
Yeah, I think Florida really kind of made a statement this year in terms of, like, we've had this this kind of rivalry between the Lightning and the Panthers in terms of the state rivalry, the divisional kind of rivalry there for a little while, that kind of Florida area thing, and it's kind of usually been a lot much more even. But I think that really they kind of put a stamp on this series to kind of go, hey, we've taken that step further, and Tampa's taken that step back. Obviously, didn't help necessarily. Tampa had a couple of disallowed goals in the final, but I feel like the series was pretty much over already by that point. It would have been a pretty difficult task for Tampa to crawl back from a 3-1 series deficit. They just don't really have the guns anymore. They don't have quite the this point in their cycle. Like, I think that's really the question for me. I was always kind of expecting Florida to come out of this series, because as much as Tampa had a good season with this like incredible Kucherov season, by and large, that was the surprise. Like, they were kind of expected to have already taken a step back. They were going to be potentially a wild card team coming into the season already, which they still ended up being at the end of the day, because their window looks to be kind of I wouldn't say necessarily behind them, but in a kind of similar way.
I don't think their window can be behind. It's a bit like with the Penguins and stuff like that. If you've got Nikita Kucherov, you can never close the window. You can't close it. So
well, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as like, Boston's window has been kind of closing for a few years. So many teams like that their window is kind of like the
Toronto. I worked it out. Toronto's problem is there's a fly screen. Like they've got the window open. There's a fly screen and they can't get through it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily to say that like maybe window isn't the right word for it. I think that their peak is behind them.
Oh God, yes.
Well, obviously, Tampa won back to back a few years back, and and the same thing. Like Boston's peak is behind them, the Penguins' peak is behind them, Washington's peak is behind them. They're all slightly different, but for the most part, they're kind of their superstars are past the kind of peak of their careers.
There's a loud bit and a quiet bit when it comes to Tampa. The loud bit is Steven Stamkos.
Yeah.
And there's been some suggestion he'll either play or in Tampa or retire. I still think that is the most slam dunk. Utah is on the phone. How much money would you like, Steven? We want you to be the centerpiece of this rebuild. I also know of some, and I look with all love and respect because he knows who he is, and it's not Tim, but he knows who he is. With all love and respect, I don't believe that Steven Stamkos is going to Detroit to help Steve Yzerman. That is not a thing. I kind of feel like Steven Stamkos is going to get a phone call from Utah going, how much? What do you want? We'll pay you whatever you want to be the centerpiece of this, because they want success. They've said they are going to spend big. And I think that's where they might put some money is in Steven Stamkos. The quiet bit is Victor Hedman. I'm really interested to see what the next 12 months for Hedman looks like. Because, he's 33, one more year left on that contract. What does the next 12 months look like for Hedman now? He's got it's a modified no trade. List of 10 teams he could be traded to. Do you, if you're Tampa, look to retool on the fly and see if you can get something brilliant for him? Take that and see what you can spin. Or do you go, this is a legend of this club. We ride with him until the end.
I mean, look, I think probably a big part of it is whether or not they can retain Stamkos, and they have some money. They could potentially get it done, but it came down to the wire for the last Stamkos. It literally came down to like free agency day.
And remember, the start of this season, Stamkos wasn't coming to training camp. He was having conversations about. I'm not necessarily. He was agitating for a new deal. They weren't going to give him one, and so he wasn't coming.
Yeah.
So I think, look, they've got the cap space they've got coming up for this season is only 12 million. They've got 12. They've still got to re-sign on some. They've got to add some defense. They have to add defense. The other thing too, though, with this team as to why they can't close the door is they've got Andrei Vasilevsky on 9.5 until the end of time. Like, if you've got Kucherov and Vasilevsky on money until the end of time, and Sergachev, you can't close.
And point. Like, I feel like they're kind of locked in to compete with that.
They're locked in to compete. The problem is going to be, what do they do around the edges of this? And look, it could be, there could be some very interesting phone calls. I wonder. So I talked about Mana. I wonder if there's a phone call going, hey, Victor Hedman, Mitch Marner. And then you just look to add young, cheap defense on the back end of that and just go, we're going to go Kucherov, Point, Marner. And just
interesting.
That could be fascinating. I don't think they will, by the way. But that's me looking at it and going, well, Toronto would take Victor Hedman in a heartbeat because they're looking for that defenseman. Yeah. But, again, I don't think that Tampa would do that. But I'm just saying, there are a number of really interesting phone calls, I think, that are going to be happening this offseason. And I think there's going to be at least 2 or 3 moves that nobody sees coming. I think the Utah thing adds a lot because I don't think anyone knows what Utah is going to do. And I think that they will be given the brief, be deeply, deeply aggressive. Right. We don't care what they take
off the Penguins. That'd be nice.
I don't think they'll be that aggressive. I know you're hoping for it. But Yeah, so I don't. The last thing
I don't see
before
it.
we sort of move through this with Tampa, just a yes or no. Do you think Stamkos stays in Tampa?
I want to lean towards yes. I don't have strong feelings about it, but if I had to put my money, I think I would lean towards yes. I think there's just he's got such a history there. I think the likelihood of a big option kind of coming up somewhere else or whatever compared to the comfort of staying there in the last few years of his career, I would lean towards he's staying.
I'm going the opposite way. I think he's done. I think he goes. By the way, just to keep everyone online with what's going on in press conferences, etc., it's now come out. People are now sharing the footage of Pasternak doing the exact same thing off a Torrey Krug bomb against Calgary, and it's the same move.
Exactly the same play, yeah.
It's a set play. They're like,
that
is 100% a set play.
Yeah.
So now let's go to the series that is going to be really quick to talk about, because the Washington Capitals got absolutely curb stomped and swept by the New York Rangers in a very deeply uncompetitive series, with Ovechkin scoring after dragging the Capitals to the playoffs by himself. Grand total of 0 points.
Yeah, that's I'm not shocked. I mean, look, it wasn't a series. It was never going to be a series. I'm actually disappointed in myself that I picked this series to go 5, because it was the obvious scenario that at no point in time were the Rangers going to break a sweat against a Washington Capitals team that made the playoffs by accident, and at least had the decency not to waste our time.
Yeah, look, I don't think we learned a single thing from this series. I don't think we learned anything, because the Rangers just did what you would expect the Rangers to do. The Caps, look, Spencer Carberry, great job getting to the playoffs in your first full season. And,
yeah, I mean, like, honestly, the fact that even made the playoffs with like a negative 30-something goal differential is just speaks to how terrible the Metro was.
I do appreciate, by the way, that Carberry wasn't afraid to call out Ovechkin. I've appreciated the fact that he's actually been prepared just to call out Ovechkin and go, look, we need, like he said in game 3, he goes, we need more. And then got to the end, he's like, he didn't have anything left. Yeah. And he just said straight up. It wasn't like, we didn't help him or blah, 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 blah. He just said, no, Ovi had nothing left.
Yeah. And I mean, look, that's kind of been the story of Ovi's season. We've seen age hit Ovi in a big way this year. He's been the kind of man that time forgot for a long time, but eventually, age is undefeated. It's caught up to him. We saw him struggle to score for the first time this year. And he managed later in the season to kind of get back a bunch of goals, but it's not going to be a triumphant crossing the line for Ovi to beat Gretzky's record. It's going to be clawing and dragging the last couple of years.
He'll absolutely trip over the line. If he does it, he'll fall over the line.
He'll probably be on an empty net.
I expect the last goal to, like, he falls over and literally hits his helmet and goes in.
Yeah.
I think that the next series is one of my biggest disappointments, because I'm disappointed that they did not sweep the New York Islanders. The Carolina Hurricanes win. I
picked this one correctly. This is one of the 2 series that I picked the games correctly. The first one was that Boston, outcome. The second one was this series, and it's just because the Islanders are just such a fucking hard team to beat. As much as they're not great, they're also just the epitome of a hard team to play against and a hard team to scrape out a win against. And I think that's the only reason that they were even vaguely in this series against Carolina, who just outclassed them in every way.
Yeah, it wasn't close.
No, I mean, especially that second game of the series where they got out-chanced by 85 scoring chances or something, just some insane number. They had 12 shots the entire game. Like that, at that point in time, they really should have just mercy ruled the whole fucking series.
Yeah, I was really pissed off that we got an overtime win for the Islanders in Game 4, because I'm like, can we just stop?
Yeah, let's just
know what's going to happen.
End this.
Don't do this. And thankfully, Carolina just decided to go out and score 6 in the 5th.
Yeah.
But again, Lou Lamoriello, what a team builder. He's amazing, that man. It's time to go, but he won't. Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, the Islanders have been the same fucking team for 10 years, and that team is good enough to, scrounge out a handful of wins and not good enough to win anything significant.
No series made me more angry than the following series, which is Edmonton, LA. And the reason it made me angry is that once again, the LA Kings proved they know the exact formula as to how to beat the Edmonton Oilers, and then they're not good enough to do it.
Yeah.
Because it worked. It was working. And then they take a dumb penalty, and that Oilers penalty power play is insane.
Yes.
So they would do all of the hard work.
It's a cheat code.
They literally 5-on-5 hockey numbers. The Kings were winning that in 5-on-5. And then they take a stupid penalty and Leon Draisaitl would score.
Yeah.
And then they take another stupid penalty and Leon Draisaitl would score. And literally the series was 5-on-5. They kept it tight. They actually kept McDavid and Draisaitl in 5-on-5 pretty quiet. They did a very good job at that. Then they'd concede a really dumb penalty and the power play goes to work and scores. And that's the series. And like the other problem is that LA lacks the firepower to take advantage of the close ones. Like that game 4, if you had said that the Edmonton Oilers would be held to 12 shots in a game, in a playoff game, you go, well, how far did they lose by? And the answer was they won 1-0.
Yeah. I mean, honestly impressed. I did not think that the Oilers had it in them to scrape out a 1-0 game. Like that's such an anti-Oilers game.
I kind of actually feel like there might be. I'd probably make some change in LA because it feels like they've tried to shortcut the reboot there.
Yeah,
and I think
that they kind of they were all knuckling down for this difficult rebuild where it's like, it's unfortunate that we still have these guys. We have Doughty and Kopitar and stuff like that here that are going to have to struggle through this last few years as we rebuild, and then all of a sudden their prospect pipeline hit in a big way. They had a whole bunch of guys kind of come in and surround themselves, and then they were kind of good again. All of a sudden, they were making the playoffs. Not necessarily good in terms of a contender, but they were suddenly competitive again. And it's like, this is surprising. We get the last few years of Kopitar and Doughty actually being a competitive team, but at the same time, that's kind of ended up in them maybe shortchanging their ability to really actually properly rebuild the team.
They've also got some interesting questions, like Quentin Byfield's coming up. And I don't know what you do because I still think he's great, but he hasn't developed yet to the point where you can give him a big deal. Yeah. And I don't know what these contracts. They've got a lot of young players coming up on these contracts. I don't know what any of these contracts are going to look like because I don't think there's actually enough evidence one way or the other to give you a clue. So I think that Rob Blake's got a couple of really interesting decisions, and I think the Kings have a really interesting decision on him coming up as well. I also think, and I said this to you yesterday, I sent Brendon a message yesterday where I'm like, I think we all focused too much on the wrong last game of the season. I think everyone was focused on the last game, the play-in in the East. I don't think it mattered who the hell got that place in the East. I think the Rangers were going to stomp them into the ground.
Yeah.
But I think the game we all missed out on, that was that LA and Vegas last games of the season where I think a couple of teams made a few decisions. Yeah. I think that Vegas actively tried to avoid the Oilers. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's weird. I didn't get the logic.
Like they made a business decision, and their business decision was we want to play Dallas rather than the Oilers. And I wouldn't have made that choice. That might have been Peter DeBoer, and they're like, we know that hockey, maybe. Yeah. But what is going to frustrate me through this playoffs is the top half of the West is brutal.
Yeah.
And I think you've got three of the best teams currently still active. Only two of them, I think, one of them's going to go out tomorrow.
Yeah.
But you've got Dallas, you've got Vegas, and you've got the Avs in the top.
Yeah.
And the bottom half is basically the Oilers free skating to the conference final.
Yeah.
We'll part of that
was the Vegas paper tiger of them, kind of all that whole team coming together with Mark Stone returning and bringing in, basically a whole bunch of relatively new pieces towards the end of that season.
Brought in,
Hurdle and rejoin, all of that kind of stuff. Like, obviously there's a handful of pieces there that weren't playing together the entire season, and that's why they ended up on that side of the bracket in wildcard 2, when they realistically, if they'd been all playing together the entire season, they would have been probably much higher. But still, obviously, one relatively weak side of the bracket and one very, strong side of the bracket. And I really feel like, we'll get to it soon, but, that Dallas Vegas series really should have been the conference final.
Oh, yeah. The other thing in LA that I think is really important to talk about, when I talk about Rob Blake's there's some interesting conversations around Rob Blake. That Pierre-Luc Dubois contract looks terrible.
Yeah, that's probably, as we're talking about.
They're legitimately talking buyout.
Yeah, that's the thing. People online talking about like, does it count as like the 1/3 buyout rather than the 2/3 buyout? Because
apparently the answer is they can get away with like 1 point whatever million over the length of the contract.
Yeah, I think if they do it theoretically early enough, I've seen it two different ways though, because I think partially it's about whether or not they're 26 on a certain date rather than at the time of the buyout. So I'd have to double check that. But either way, like obviously, it's a long contract. It's what was it, 8 years at 8.5 or something? It's the Draisaitl contract basically, which is nuts. But obviously, not a great start of his tenure in LA for Pierre-Luc Dubois. After kind of backing himself to get moved and LA picking him up and probably again, like we were saying, a consequence of that, trying to accelerate their rebuild and bringing in this potential top 6 piece that was going to push them over the line, and that really kind of hasn't happened, and maybe that's part of the missed opportunity for LA.
Yeah, look, I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation if they decide to buy him out. Does Montreal finally pull the trigger? I don't even know if they would, to be honest with you. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I mean, look, I don't know necessarily. I haven't really kind of watched Dubois enough this year to really say whether or not I think that he would succeed somewhere else, or if he might turn it around. We've seen players struggle, in a first year on a team, and then get the system, and it all kind of clicks, and they improve or something. Like, I don't know if at this point in his career Dubois is done or anything. I don't know whether or not he's going to live up to this contract that he got given. Is
40 points in 82 games playing first line minutes.
Yeah.
That's not.
Obviously, that's it's disappointing. Maybe it's just a matter of fit. Maybe it's a matter of system. But they really should have been more aware of that.
Plus minus doesn't mean much.
They gave him that contract.
While plus minus doesn't mean a hell of a lot. He's a -9 on a Kings team that was decent. So that's an issue. Now, the NPSET commented and said, you're vastly underrating the Canucks. Let me explain this. So the Canucks beat the Nashville Predators in 6.
Yeah.
Now, I agree to some extent that I'm probably underrating the Canucks by going, that's a bit of a walkover for the Oilers. But my rationale behind that has nothing to do with underrating Vancouver and everything to do with what the hell's happening in net in Vancouver. They are on their 3rd goalie. Silovs has played less than 10 games, right? They are the first team to win a playoff series with 3 goalies getting wins. 3 of them. 3 different goalies. I think the issue is that you've got a goaltending situation in Vancouver, which, while fantastic to get over the line against Nashville was playing with found money. Absolute found money. They do not have the offensive weapons the Edmonton Oilers do. And if you are expecting a Vancouver team who has been, don't get me wrong, absolutely brilliant regular season. They took the steps we've asked them to take. Getting into the playoffs, fantastic. Winning a round in the playoffs, absolutely fantastic. You play who's in front of you. But you are expecting Silovs and that defense that was pushed by a Nashville team that doesn't really have a lot going for it offensively to stand up to Draisaitl or McDavid.
Look, have we seen a Vancouver team go into a playoff series and have a goalie performance that entirely stole a series that they didn't deserve to win before in the recent past? Absolutely, we have.
Is that goalie currently injured? Yes.
That goalie is currently injured. Yeah, I don't know. Look, obviously goaltending is voodoo, and any goalie can get hot, even if it's Arthur Silovs. It could absolutely happen. I wouldn't bet on it. To expect him to basically have to put up an insane series to keep them in it. Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's something to be said for the fact that Elias Pettersson hasn't necessarily made his stamp on the playoffs yet.
Yeah.
And we know obviously he has another year. If he can find that kind of early season form and have a big kind of war against McDavid and make an impact or whatever, that could happen. But I mean, look, I love Elias Pettersson, but I wouldn't necessarily expect him to have a bigger impact in this series than McDavid and Draisaitl.
My concern for this series is the blueprint to how to beat the Oilers, which I said the Kings know but couldn't execute it, is to tie the McDavid Draisaitl line up and just make them play minutes and make them churn minutes and just frustrate. And the second they go off the ice, take advantage. The problem for me is that Vancouver is not built to do that. No. Vancouver is built a little bit more for a track meet. Yeah. And you do not want to enter a track meet with McDavid and Draisaitl. That's not what you want to be doing, because if this goes end to end up and down the ice, you are not winning that. You've got to frustrate them. I would love to see Vancouver frustrate the ever-loving hell out of them, because the thing is, I still don't trust the Edmonton defense. I still don't trust the Edmonton goaltending. I think both of them are highly dubious. I just feel like Vancouver will give too much of an opportunity for Edmonton to score. That's my concern. If Thatcher Demko's in and Thatcher Demko's healthy, I would be more inclined to go, this is a very tight series.
Yeah. I mean, look,
I want this to be ridiculously tight. I kind of don't really like the fact that I still don't think the Oilers are well built, and I don't like the idea they will get an absolute free run through.
Yeah, but, I mean, I think that Vancouver, one of the big kind of, strong points of their series against the Predators was their penalty kill.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily expect them to be able to have a penalty kill that succeeds at 92% efficiency against the Oilers. I don't know if they can rely on that in the same way that they can.
Yeah, my whole thing is
to almost shut out the Nashville power play. It's a very different thing to shut out a Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl.
I want to see it happen. Look, don't get me wrong. I want to see it happen. I want to see the Canucks do that. I still don't think the Oilers are well built. I still don't think they're well structured. I still think Skinner's dubious in goal. I still think the defense is poorly built. But I just keep looking at it and just keep saying to myself, I think Vancouver's going to try to enter a track meet with Edmonton, and I don't think that's going to go well for them.
I don't even know if they want to. I just think that they will. Like that's kind of just going to happen.
Yeah, I think what happens is that McDavid and Draisaitl might get in early, and if they get in early, it's just going to become one, and that doesn't go well for anyone. Look, again, hopefully Vancouver can tie it up and make it tough. Again, if you can make the McDavid and Draisaitl minutes tough, you get a chance.
But look, if they can find a shutdown kind of combination there that limits them, then absolutely to anyone.
If you can strategize to frustrate them, you won't stop them, but if you can frustrate them 5-on-5 and create opportunities. The other thing that Vancouver needs to do is, remember, the start of the season, they were on a PDO bender. Right? Yeah. Their shooting percentages were insane. They could really do with going back to that.
That'd be a big help.
If they can go back to the shooting percentages they had in the first third of the season, they've got every chance.
So they need to get real lucky, is what we're saying.
Right. Get hot fast. All right, Colorado, Winnipeg. Now, the first game had me slightly concerned.
That was a track meet.
Because if there was one game that we thought was going to be 7-6, it was Winnipeg, Colorado. But after that first game, a couple of things happened. So I said, if you remember in my predictions for this one, and I had a few conversations with people who thought that I was speaking out of shit. I said, if you remember, I don't think Winnipeg consistently can score that many goals.
No.
And I think that Colorado have the ability, and if they can light Hellebuck up, they will roll over the top of them. And what happened? The first game, Winnipeg scored 7, and I went, oh, God, Alexander Georgiev's going to have one of those series. Oh, no, here we go. But first of all, Hellebuck conceded 6. The rest of the series was 5, 6, 5, 6. Connor Hellebuck was a turnstile. Absolute turnstile. And Winnipeg could not score. They got 2, 2, 1, 3 in the last one, but that was just mainly because Colorado tried to shut it down. They got a couple of goals, and then Colorado
really a question about whether or not Colorado could score. It was really a matter of about whether or not Winnipeg could stop them from scoring.
Colorado
it turned out really just not to be the case.
I know that the Rangers stomped the Caps, and I know that we had a couple of those series, but I tipped the Avalanche to win the Cup. And Colorado, for me, were the class of the first round by a mile because of the team they beat. They made Winnipeg just look so second-rate.
Yeah.
And that team, Alexander Georgiev, after that first game, really good. He suddenly locked in and was really good. And all you need to get is some league average goaltending on that team. And
that's it. You don't need
Kyle McCarr being one of the top 3 defensemen in the league. I like the fact we've probably got the 3 best defensemen in the league all still going, which is really nice to see. But Nathan McKinnon just doing Nathan McKinnon things, and I know that Draisaitl can eat a lot of conversations off his series, but I think Nathan McKinnon just solidified. Well, there's 2 ways to look at it. You can either look at it as Nathan McKinnon solidified why he's probably going to win the Hart this year, or you could also look at the idea of the fact that if you look at what happened in the Tampa series, that's more proof that Kucherov should be the MVP because when Kucherov performed, they were absolutely terrible.
Yeah,
so he's definitely the MVP. But I think Nathan McKinnon in that series just insane. Like he's a bit good at hockey, everybody. He's a bit good at hockey.
Yeah, it's a real disappointment that like 2 of Dallas, Vegas, and Colorado aren't going to make it into the Cup final, into the Western Conference final.
I don't know. I really like this Colorado. I actually like this Colorado team a little bit more than that team that won them the Cup. Because I just think they're just solid. And like they just roll lines at you, and they just keep rolling lines at you. And you never feel like, again, 5-6, 5-6 against Winnipeg after putting up 6 in a losing effort in the first game. Like they didn't score less than 5 goals in a game.
Through 5 games. That's impressive.
That's insane. Again, a goals against average for Hellebuck of 5.23 in the series. It's not good. Just not good. I'm also interested with Winnipeg. Do they decide that they can do better than Rick Bowness? I'm intrigued by that one too.
Yeah, I'm curious how they feel about the team at this point in time. Whether this year was a little bit of a flash in the pan, like found money thing, or whether or not they think that they need to compete from now on.
I think it's really. I think the number of coaches that are available is really going to make this interesting. I get the feeling that you're going to have. I get the feeling you're going to have a couple of coaches out there who are going to make this market really interesting, and if teams think they've got a chance. I think if Gerard Gallant hasn't signed a contract with somebody, there might be a few teams that go, well, we might be prepared to move on from our coach to bring Gallant in. It kind of feels accurate. Also, can we just quickly talk about the fact that the 3 nominees for the Jack Adams, and you could end up with Rick Bowness winning a Jack Adams and also being fired in the same season.
I mean, not the first time that kind of things happen. But
it's a real possibility that by the time it gets around to presenting the Jack Adams, the man who wins the Jack Adams could get fired.
Yeah, I mean, and
I think it should be Andrew Brendon.
The person who wins it is fired in the next 12 months.
Can I also just point out, we've talked about this before, but nobody in their right mind should vaguely consider that the Jack Adams actually goes to the best coach.
No.
You cannot tell me that Peter Laviolette doesn't deserve a nomination for winning the President's Trophy with the Rangers. Like, come on. Like, I know they were decent, and I know they've made playoffs, and I know all of that stuff, but you cannot tell me that, like, he replaced Gerard Gallant and they got better. Like, you can't.
So really is it, like, you know, unless it's an absolute juggernaut team like that, you know, Boston team that, you know, like set records and stuff like that. So rarely does it go to the
a good coach.
Good coach of a good team who was good the entire season. So rarely, mostly it's a team that was supposed to be shit that ended up being okay.
Probably it was somewhat decent.
Video.
They were somewhat decent, everybody. It's like
it was supposed to suck, and they made the playoffs somehow.
But it goes back to, I think it was Wyshynski or Merrick, I can't remember who it was, who put forward that Mike Greer is general manager of the year.
Yeah,
because Mike Greer has done exactly what San Jose needed him to do.
Yeah. Well, what was he supposed to do?
Now he won't get a nomination for general manager of the year, and I wouldn't nominate him for general manager of the year. But if you want to come up with all of these insane valuations on why you award these awards, Mike Greer should be nominated for general manager of the year for doing exactly what the San Jose Sharks needed. Like, there's no way he shouldn't be.
Let's talk about the last series that hasn't ended just yet. But, you know, for my money, has been the class of the
what a game. What a series of games.
Yeah. So Vegas versus Dallas. You know, I picked Dallas coming out of this, and I expected it to be a little bit more one-sided for Dallas because I just didn't know who Vegas was at this point in time with the additions that they'd made late, and that was kind of the reason that I picked against them. As much as I love Dallas anyway, like I didn't expect it to be like a Game 7 affair because I thought that it might take a little while for the depth on Vegas that hasn't played with them the entire year to click. But they've been great. Dallas has been great. Like you watch
Aiden Hill exists.
Yeah, I mean, you watch that series versus some of the other series, and they just look like they're playing a different sport. It just looks like a different, level of sport to some of the other series.
Like the Leafs Bruins series was a fun series to watch, but the quality of hockey in Dallas and Vegas is night and day. It's the Boston versus Toronto series is some of the worst clumsy hockey I've seen in a playoff series ever. Like some real just stinking play at times. This has been high level. Absolutely.
Yeah. And by and large, like, a lot of really close games. We had a 4-3 Vegas win in the first one and then a 3-1. And then I think after that point, people were like, oh shit, is this it for Dallas? They come back, they win the next two, 3-2 in overtime and 4-2. All of a sudden we've got, a tied series, and then it goes back and forth, 3-2 win for Dallas and a 2-0 win for Vegas. And we're going to a Game 7, in this series that, look, I think that, in a lot of ways, we've really been kind of blessed that this has, gone back and forward and gone so long and been so close, because, it would have been a shame if this, was just a stumble or whatever, and a bunch of 3-2 games, and we only got 4 games of it. We've gotten the most that we can out of this series, as much as it probably should have happened 2 rounds later.
Yeah, if ever there was a series where I was really happy that it's gone 7, it's this one, because it's going to be great. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. I'm looking forward to this game.
I think it's probably going to be that, especially if Dallas makes it through. I think in a lot of ways this is kind of the coming out party for Dallas in terms of being a contender and people paying attention to them that previously maybe weren't so aware of Dallas and some of the players that they've got. They've had some of the young guys kind of turn up in a big way, like Wyatt Johnston. We've seen Jason Robinson on the big stage. Being an incredible world-class player and so forth. So this is maybe a team that a lot of people, especially people who watch teams in the East, maybe aren't so aware of. And it's going to, be nice to, especially if they make it through another round, at least for people to get more kind of, global eyes on this team.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm a massive, being someone who obviously watches the West rather closely. I've been saying that a lot, is that I think there are a lot of people who only follow Eastern teams or only follow the Canadian teams, and they ignore a lot of these teams in the West. And, I think there will be a lot of people tonight, especially, who will be going, it's Bruins and Florida, and these are the two teams that are, really going to fight this out. And whoever gets there, they're going to push through. I think you need to have a look at the West. I think, and everyone goes, the Oilers are in the West. Yes, they are. But look at the juggernauts that are in the top. But whoever comes out of Dallas versus Vegas, that series against the Avs is going to be something else. And then whoever comes out of that game, they might be beaten up and tired, and they could be easy pickings for, say if the Oilers do what we expect, they could be easy pickings for an Oilers team that's a bit more refreshed. The other idea is they've been through a couple of series and they could just be really battle-hardened and prepared to run over the top of you. And that's the other thing I think that a lot of people have ignored, is that I think that the West traditionally tends to play more big body hockey. Doesn't mean it's without skill. On the contrary, there's a hell of a lot of skill to it, but they play a lot heavier. And what you've got in those teams that are in the top part of this bracket are three teams that play with a hell of a lot of ability, a hell of a lot of pace, and very heavy. And I think that whoever runs into whichever team comes out of that top half is going to be in for an absolute war, because those teams are really tough. And it's good. If you haven't watched a lot of the West, I really implore you to watch these series coming up, because they're going to be really good. I think tomorrow, the two games you've got tomorrow, the Game 7 and the Game 1, it's a fantastic day of hockey.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like, you've got Game 7, Dallas versus Vegas, and you've got Game 1, New York versus Carolina. Like, come on. Those are going to be two amazingly good series. The last note on all of this stuff is they haven't officially announced, although it looks like Oilers Canucks will start on Tuesday in Vancouver. Not announced officially yet, because they're waiting on the result of Dallas-Vegas. Because if Vegas wins, they have to open the series in Colorado.
Yeah.
And that means that they've got to wait. The availability for the arena is Wednesday, is Wednesday, and they don't have it. So they'd actually have to play that game on Tuesday. So they'd have to move everything around a little bit. So they're waiting to see what happens with Dallas-Vegas before officially confirming what day Edmonton versus the Canucks starts, but likely to be Tuesday. Likely, but it could be bumped to Wednesday depending on if the other one needs to move, and if they don't want crossovers.
All right, so to wrap up, we want to make some quick predictions on these series. Depending, obviously, we don't know one of the results, but we can talk about the two different options.
My bracket final, I think I had the Hurricanes versus the Avs.
Yeah. My bracket so far has I've picked every winner.
I've lost two series. I've lost two. I lost the Toronto series, and I lost out because I took a punt on the Kings being better than they were. I think the Oilers beat the Canucks. I think that the Avalanche beat whoever the hell they play, probably in a long series. I think.
So yeah, I think I've got
Panthers will steamroll Bruins. Look, I've tipped the Hurricanes.
Yeah.
But I think the Rangers.
Okay. So I picked Carolina in that series, and I had more or less these teams in these things, and I picked Carolina. So I'm going to stick with that, and Florida beating Boston. I think that I'm still pretty confident about those two. I did have Edmonton beating Vancouver, for the reasons that we talked about. Yeah. I think interesting. I think I could go two different ways for that final series. I think if Dallas gets in, I picked Dallas, and I'll follow that through. I think if Vegas gets in, I don't know. I'm tempted to go for Colorado. I think that would be my pick if Vegas gets in. I like that. I like that matchup a little bit better. But yeah, that's the two ways I'm going to go with it. But I'm picking Dallas to come out of this series and then beat Colorado.
I tipped the Avs from the start of the season. I've been big on the Avs winning the cup from the start of this season.
I wouldn't be upset. I'd be happy.
Nothing in what I saw in that first round changed my mind that I think the Avs are the quality, and I think there's a few good quality teams out there, but I think that the Avs are the ones. Now, the rest of this week, there will be a few more pods this week coming out. So First thing that will be happening is there will be a live stream. I will confirm the times, but there will be a live stream around the draft lottery, because I know there are a lot of people that are hoping to watch me cry at San Jose being bumped back to third. So for those people, screw you. I've decided I'm kind of okay with the Sharks not getting the lottery balls for first, as long as a team that's 11 or after get it. Because obviously we still win the lottery if it's a team post 11. So just so everyone knows how that works, by the way, if a team that's outside of the top 10 wins the draft lottery, the team that is first is locked in, because you can only move up 10 spots. So they only draw 2 lotteries. They draw 1 for first and 1 for second. If the team that's drawn for first is after 11, the team that's first gets the first overall, and that team moves up 10 spots. So for San Jose, the best result that could possibly happen is either we win it straight up, or for me, the best result that could happen would be the Penguins win the draft lottery. And the reason that's good is that we own the Penguins pick, and the Penguins would then have to make a decision over whether we get next year's first or we get this year's first.
Yeah.
And the Sharks would automatically win the lottery anyway. So I'm hoping for a Penguins win, if not the Sharks, because
it's nice to have options.
It's nice to have options. We really need this. And then also, I am hoping to confirm we should have some more stuff on the Coyotes later in this week. I'm hoping to talk to Leah Merrill again. That's up in the air at the moment, just on timings. But hopefully later this week we'll have some conversations with Leah, formerly of the PHNX podcast. We've got to talk about all of that sort of stuff. But obviously with the Coyotes moving to Utah, we were going to have a lovely chat about the postseason and what that looked like, and it's going to be a nice quiet chat about the Coyotes. And by the time we're going to get to talk, the Coyotes are not a thing. So that's going to be, they did, by the way, if you haven't seen any of that stuff that they did in terms of their coverage for the last bit of the Coyotes, go and watch it. It still exists online. Some of the reporting they did, some of the coverage they did. And if you don't think that hockey can work in Arizona, go and watch their stuff. Go and look at the fan engagement. Go and look at all the stories they're telling about what's going on there. Hockey works in Arizona. It's just that the ownership didn't. So I highly recommend to go and check out the past PHNX stuff as well. But we're hoping to have Leah before the end of the week as well. But that's your lot in what has been a really action-packed weekend, really. And we're still not done. We're still not finished, but we're mostly finished. So thanks a lot, everyone. As always, if you like it, please share it around. Tell everyone we exist, because we had some really good numbers off the last podcast as well. Some very good numbers, some very good engagement. Thank you, everyone. It means the world to us doing that, and we will catch you all later.
Thanks, guys. See ya.